This is a 2007 Nissan Armada. It has a problem with the wheel bearing howling when you make turns on one side, making a growling noise on the front end. So I'm going to take the wheel off and change the wheel bearing in it. Went ahead and raised the vehicle up, set it on a jack stand, took the 21mm lug nuts off and took the wheel off. Once you got your wheel off, stick a punch or screwdriver into the rotor and do this quarter pin from the axle. And while the punch is holding it against the caliper, take this nut loose. If you don't have an impact, got an impact, you can do it about any time. If the threads are gold up, wire brush them off. I'm going to turn the steering wheel to the right. Stick a screwdriver in here against the rotor and open this caliper up a little bit. And take these 18mm caliper hanger bolts out, 2 of them. You could go ahead and take your caliper off and check and make sure the slide pins and stuff's working if you wanted to. I'm going to hang this caliper off the upper control arm with a bungee cord. I'm going to go ahead and unfasten the ABS wire from its hold down slots. And unlock it from the connector. Just push this center pin in. Just pay attention how it's routed. Okay, it's hanging off now. I think I'm gonna raise that caliper up a little higher so I can get in behind here and get these hub bolts out. The axle nut's a 32mm. I took a hammer and tapped the axle back. Not too hard unless you put a punch in the center of the axle. You don't want to damage the threads on the outside. This one moves pretty easy, so. I'm going to take the hub bolts off. They're 21mm. 3 of them, 1, 2, and then 3 pattern. Just stick some spacers between the spindle and the hub and drive a chisel between the hub to get it broke loose if it's really stuck. I still got the dust cover. I put a shim behind the dust cover to keep from crushing it in, and then a piece of stick steel to just enough room to get a chisel down in there. And it's starting to get a gap opened up in it. That was a bear. Just remember your ABS sensor goes to the face in the back. Dust cover, depression, faces a wheel bearing. Verify that your wheel bearing has the roughness to it, which this one does, and noise. Should be quiet. If your new wheel bearing comes with ABS sensor, don't worry about it. If it don't, you'll have to take this one off and clean it up. I'll take a wire brush of these splines and clean this center out with sandpaper or file, something rough to get rid of the scale off of it and clean the outer perimeter up. A new wheel bearing in it. This is an opportune time to check the tie rod in for any looseness. The lower ball joint. Clean this area up with a wire brush, some 80 grit sandpaper and brake cleaner. I'm going to put a light haze of standard duty axle grease on this splined area, and probably line this opening with some light coated grease that the wheel bearing slides in, but not getting any grease in any of the bolt holes. And I'm going to scrape the back brake dust cover off. And if you got any boogers on the back brake plate or raised up pieces of metal, go ahead and file or grind them back flat. Went ahead and lined the hole in the splines with grease. Just a haze grease. Cleaned up the surface. We'll go ahead and load the wheel bearing. The ABS sensor points to the back. That's one of its first guides for the wire there. And don't forget the dust cover, it goes on behind it. I'm checking the ABS sensor on a new wheel bearing before it gets fully installed. It's showing about 1900 ohms. The factory one was a little over 1700 ohms. Got the dust shield on. The wheel bearing's mounted. I'm going to start sticking the bolts back in the wheel bearing. Put some blue Loctite on them and tighten them to 150 foot-pounds. The manufacturer recommends putting new bolts in it and the brake caliper hanger. They also torque to 150 foot-pounds. The axle nut tightens to 100 foot-pounds. 3 wheel bearing bolts are Loctited up, ready to go back in. When you slip the wheel bearing in there, keep one of the bolt holes in line with the top. The ABS cable goes to the back. And the dust cover will set about so. It liked it. I'm using a stubby 1/2-inch drive wobbler to get around the dry shaft boot. Be sure not to dent the band in any place by pushing around directly on it. It'll leak grease possibly. I'm going to go ahead and route the ABS cable. Clean any debris out from behind your rotor where it mounts to the wheel bearing. Make sure the mounting surface on the wheel bearing is clean. And this is grit and raised up, rust free. I'm going to stick the rotor on there and one lug nut. Then mount the caliper back on. Once your caliper bolts are torqued down, make sure the ABS is plugged in and routed correctly and not interfering with anything. Pump the brakes up, and you can either hold the rotor with the brakes or stick a punch down in, or chisel or whatever down into the fins and tighten the axle nut down to 100 foot-pounds. Put the new carter pin through the hole provided, or the old carter pin if it's still usable, and put the wheel on, tighten the lug nuts down to 100 foot-pounds. once you got your lug nuts tightened down to 100 foot-pounds, give the wheel a little spin and make sure you didn't bend the heat shield or dust shield into the rotor or something getting caught up. Make sure there's clearance between the ABS wire and that the brake hose isn't twisted in a knot. Take it for a little drive.